On the evening of December 7th at Sashara City Main Street, shopkeepers are calling to lure potential customers in. Families are discussing what they will be having for dinner. And in between it all, a bloody trail forms behind a naked man with his arms and legs drenched in his own blood. The crowd is horrified and in shock at the presence of this unstable man uttering gibberish. And in the middle of the chaos, a college student is oblivious as he writes a text to his girlfriend. The naked man bumps into the student and shoots blood straight into his face. The student shoves him off to the point where the man loses his balance and lands on the top of his head, cracking it open. Detective Misoguchi Ken investigates the crime scene. He follows the bloody footprint trail back to a chilling sight, a blood-streaked manhole with a ladder leading down to an ominous darkness. This is the beginning of Manhole by Tetsuya Susui, a horror mystery series from 2004 that follows two police officers as they investigate the mysterious source of a new contagious disease infecting Sashara City. It's been praised for its terrifying art style and depictions of gore that heavily rely on a subgenre called body horror. This type of horror taps into the fragile nature of our bodies, usually through scenes with surgeries, unnatural transformations, or mutilation. Many authors and filmmakers like to see our bodies as blank canvases for grotesque horror. It may make people feel squeamish, but to them it's a morbid fascination. But not many feel the same way, which led to this series actually getting banned in Japan. So today, we're going to dissect this series while giving my first impressions on each of the 3 volumes and find out what makes this series such a controversial read. But before we do that, if you guys like horror and anime videos and want to support the channel, then why not hit that subscribe button and share this video with all your horror fanatics. But without further ado, let's start climbing down and exploring Manhole. The story continues with both Detective Ken and the other main character, Detective Inoue, attempting to track down the college student Yuichi, while in the morgue, a group of doctors are performing an autopsy on the naked man. But while opening him up, hidden inside the dead man's eye is a long, parasitic worm called a filaria. After being called by the police, Yuichi agreed to go to the police station and give his testimony about the incident. But before that, Yuichi had been feeling a bit odd, and the cause would soon reveal itself in the eye of Yuichi as he blindly strolls straight into his death. The detectives now know about the filaria and are tasked to follow clues and interrogate suspects in order to stop the spread of the disease. Now, Manhole is above all a mystery thriller for the entire first volume. We begin with a mystery to solve, and it seems like by the end we already have it all figured out, with not only the filaria and its effects revealed, but its backstory and even the identity of the culprit. But with basically the entire mystery solved, it was still able to keep us at the edge of our seats by seeing how they were going to stop it. So what became a mystery thriller naturally turned into a cat and mouse situation. When one of the detectives went to interview the first victim's father, the father mentioned a man by the name of Mizuno Masaki, a professional photographer. He asked for help to cleanse the harmful weeds, basically indicating criminals like the first victim, who was a violent gambler who would just take it out on his own parents. The filaria is from a tribe in Africa known as the One-Eyed Tribe, and as the name implies, they're missing an eye due to the filaria, but can live symbiotically if they can manage. This interview leads to the two main characters to one of his manhole laboratories, where not only does the cat and mouse chase begin, but also the rise of more incidences happening around Sashara City. Now, from describing the story going on, you wouldn't really expect a lot of comedy in such a serious tone mystery series, but there is, and it's to its advantage. First of all, not only is the comedy a good break in between the serious moments, but it's also a great way to start developing a relationship between the characters, mainly the 3 main detectives shown. Yes, we are getting to know them bit by bit, but that doesn't make them interesting. However, adding comedic moments help make them more relatable and fun to watch, which also makes readers start to root for the characters to win at the end. But mainly, the comedy shown here brings a huge factor into play, and that's its realism. The more relatable the characters are, the more real they feel. The entire horrific atmosphere of this series relies on how a situation like Manhole can happen in real life. I mean, not only does the outbreak of the COVID-19 virus add on to this, but this series does decide to make a real-life parasite as its main cause for the spread. Reality is what makes series like zombie movies so scary, because even though we think that it could never happen, there's always a little doubt in our minds that think maybe, and this series plays that role very, very well. On December 9th, 4:15 p.m., a young teenage girl falls off her bike after tripping over the lid of a bloody manhole. Outside her apartment, she sees a naked old man staring at the door. As she tries to walk away and not draw any attention to herself, the man turns around with tears streaming down his face, muttering gibberish. He tries to approach the girl, but she sprints out of there. Eventually, she makes it back to her apartment, locking the door and shouting for her mom to call the police. Her mother, confused about the situation, failed to notice the splatter of bloody footprints approaching the door. The girl yells at her mother, asking if she'd locked the windows in the living room and kitchen. When the mother goes to check, she realizes it's already too late. The naked man had reached the sliding door and began to open it. As the girl begins to panic, he gets on all fours as his gibberish starts to make sense. "I'm sorry." After the first volume, I expected a cat and mouse situation to start unfolding as the mystery started to fade out. And while we did technically get there was way more to the mystery that needed to be solved. A huge plot twist at the beginning of the volume was the connection between the first two victims and the college student. We knew that the culprit was targeting criminals or just horrible people in general, and that the college student was just the result of the first victim. But it's later revealed that the second victim is a child predator who kidnapped and killed a teenager 4 years ago. While filming all of it, he then sent those tapes to the girl's grandfather. Now, while infected, the second victim follows the girl who falls off the bike, trying to apologize. Not only does the girl look like the kid that he here, but she also lives in the same apartment as well. Later on, we see that the detectives piece together that the first victim was just trying to walk home to see his mom, only this was interrupted by bumping into the college student. Unfortunately for the student, he drew a very close resemblance to the first victim's mother. We then learned that before the first victim shot blood into his face, he was trying to mutter the words "mama" before being pushed over and then dying. What seemed like random acts became planned circumstances to strip the victims of their desires. The plot twist stops there when the conversation is interrupted by the health department, tracking the last steps of Yuichi. This then leads to the team going into his girlfriend's apartment, only to see it filled with mosquitoes carrying filaria. Trying to help a mother and her son after being infected with the disease, Mizoguchi gets stabbed in the foot with a bloody knife. All three got sent to the hospital, but thankfully, Mizoguchi seems to have not been infected. The second volume ends with the whole region being shut off to the public due to the mass number of mosquitoes infecting the area, and a small glimpse of the culprit getting his second plan in motion. While pretty short and not as much of a cat and mouse game as I expected, it was still a really informative and entertaining read, especially with the whole girlfriend situation. As for the culprit, I really wish we could have seen more of him in this volume, but I have a feeling that for the next volume, it will turn it up a notch. The mystery aspect continues at the beginning of volume 3, with the whole police department holding a meeting to find Masaki Mizuno. The detectives are still investigating the connection between the first two victims, while the commissioner finds an address linked to Mizuno. The first victim was sent to the culprit by his own parents. However, the second victim had no family or friends, so how did he come into contact with the culprit in the first place? So, they decide to go to the second victim's apartment to find any connection to Mizuno. There, they found a burnt up piece of paper revealing a couple of numbers leading to a fax, telling the victim to go somewhere. It cuts to the department reaching the house belonging to Mizuno. An elderly woman opens the door and says that her husband had been gone on a trip to Alaska for photography for 2 months. However, both the department and Mizoguchi found out at the same time that the culprit was using Masaki Mizuno as a fake name. And now, it's back to square one on who the culprit really is. Mizoguchi decides to hire a hacker to reveal a list of people who ordered the photography book online in the past 2 months. While none of the names seemed familiar to Mizoguchi, one name pops straight out to Taki: Hiroshi Kurokawa, the grandfather of the girl who was kidnapped by victim number 2, the same one who received the tapes of what he did to her 4 years ago. Now, I expected the third and final volume to be more of like a shonen final arc scenario with the culprit going head to head with the police. However, it beat my expectations and went straight back to that mystery thriller side of this story, which is done perfectly well. Since the second volume was mainly focused on the rescue of the people living in the apartment complex, it made sense to shift directions in the third since the first volume made it seem like that the mystery was already solved. So by adding plot twists and more details to things that seemed more irrelevant, it painted us a bigger picture of what we initially thought the story was. And now finally, everything was connected. We get introduced to Hiroshi Kurokawa, as he was a former biologist who worked with worm-like diseases. It is later revealed that he took over 100 million yen funds to work on a private research project. He goes on to leave for Africa to learn about Filaria and the One-Eyed Tribe, only to return to Japan a year later. He then planned to avenge his granddaughter with Filaria, but needed to test the disease on people. So he decided to work as a counseling psychologist, where he met Yoshiro Horikawa, the mother of the first victim. Since he's already avenged his granddaughter, there seems to be no risk of the spread of Filaria, but lately, Mizoguchi has been feeling a little bit odd. Mizoguchi gets a tip that Kurokawa is hunting down a pyromaniac from the taxi driver from Volume 2. As Mizoguchi and Inoue were driving, Mizoguchi felt a little weird and started hearing voices in his head. He then lost control of the car and crashed straight into the corner of a house. The next panel revealed the infected, bloodied up face of Mizoguchi. So Inoue takes it upon herself to lead the investigation and hunt down Kurokawa. With the help of the hacker, she finds out that he's going to infect a bunch of animals around Sashara and cause a mass spread of Filaria. And his next destination is a dog pound in Makino. Inoue meets up with him and then shoots him point blank into the abdomen. Now, December 21st, Kurokawa had healed from his bullet wound. He declares that the world will one day learn the truth of his plan and then share the same opinion as him. Then, in the end, he'll finally be able to say that he won. After his speech, he then Vosmazoid using the MRI scanner and a loose bolt to slit his throat open. The story ends with Inoue working at a diner and Mizoguchi returning to give her her old job back. In my opinion, it's a pretty satisfying way to end a short mystery series. The only complaint that I do have is the showdown between Inoue and Kurokawa. It seemed a little bit rushed, and mentioning the pyromaniac seemed pretty pointless. I liked how Inoue got a bigger role to play even though it was only in the last 3 chapters. I also really liked how Kurokawa went out. It leaves it a little bit ambiguous even after his death. We still don't know what's going to happen with the infected animals or if people would even agree with him. But now finishing this series, I still don't understand how this series could have been banned in an entire region in Japan. The manga will get a positive reception from both fans and critics for its characters, artwork, and for its suspenseful and realistic story. However, in 2009, the first volume was labeled a harmful book under Nagasaki's Prefecture's Young Protection and Development Ordinance, which led it to be banned in the entire prefecture. The prefecture did not inform the author of the ban as they felt it was unnecessary. However, Tetsuya learned of the ban 5 years later in late 2013. Upon learning of the ban, he would then request to reverse the decision. However, they refused. Tetsuya would later even visit the prefecture and meet them in person, but the committee still refused. This would later lead him to make Yugai Toshi, a series about censorship in Japan. And the reason for the ban? A panel depicting a man getting out of a manhole. The prefecture labeled over 27 pages out of the 210 to be harmful and promoting roughness and cruelty. Now, while reading the series, I never thought anything out of the ordinary except the large amount of nudity. The cruelty and roughness are nothing compared to a lot of shonen series and other horror mangas out there. So, in my opinion, the ban was really unnecessary. Overall, Manhole was a great mystery series to read. While short, the series was able to make me care for the characters and stay interested in the plot. I never got lost or confused, and the plot twist made sense and caught me off guard. The artwork and gore aren't as detailed and crazy as someone like Junji Ito. However, it's realistic and detailed enough to be still extremely disturbing. The realism and the mystery carried this series, and it has no reason to be banned from an entire prefecture for its roughness. Now, while this series is great, I still can't ignore the massive flaws in the last couple of chapters, with the showdown being really rushed and the fact that the pyromaniac and the infected animals were basically just pointless. I'll have to give this series a good 7.5 out of 10.